This video focuses on white collar crime, and the guest speaker talks about his book and his experiences in going into the prisons and talking to the perpetrators that committed the white collar crimes, and how they're really not that different from you or I, but just one mistake can really change everything. These are often different from other crimes because the crime they don't necessarily sometimes mean to do it, and it just seems like such a little thing, but then it ends up accumulating over time. When we think about crime, we think about it from the victim's perspective a lot of times, and not the perpetrators. And he really encouraged us to change that perspective, because from the victim's perspective, everything is very traumatic, and they put the emotions on the perpetrator. And white collar crimes is more so not trying to hurt the victim, but it's just inevitable that someone in the end gets hurt, but it's not intentional to hurt the victim. There's little regulation for businesses, so a lot of times that's where these crimes come in, and that stuff, the regulation isn't completely there or it's unclear. A lot of times we talked about in class unethical but not illegal. So a lot of times these things are very unethical, but they're not illegal, so they're still continuing to do them, and they're able to get away with these. A lot of times there's the idea that executives, big business people, who were elites in society at one time, shouldn't be put away with quote unquote thugs. And these criminals that are murderers and all that stuff. I'm just saying basically that their crime isn't to the extent, their criminal actions are a little bit different. He talked about a person who had been signing false contracts and really didn't think anything of it, and then lied about it for years and years. And then eventually a bank came in and asked him face to face. He said, "Are these papers right?" And he couldn't do it. He couldn't tell them. He couldn't lie to their face. So the moral of that story, just lying on paper is a lot easier to do versus lying face to face. If that person had come years ago, he would have never done it. He would have said straight to their face, whatever. But it really shows the proximity between individuals and their victim. Once they're face to face with their victim, it's a whole new ballgame. They're not just able to write something down. They actually have to physically see who they're hurting and who they're affecting. He also talked about how when he went into the prisons, he wasn't necessarily worried that they'd steal something from them. They weren't very scary, the white collar criminals, because they weren't necessarily usually stealing directly from someone. They were stealing from a company, or they were stealing from the idea of something, so they weren't face to face with a person, so they weren't directly stealing. So when dealing with money in businesses, your job is to acquire info. So a lot of times we sit here and think, oh my gosh, how did these people do that? How did this person do something so stupid? And how did they not realize what they were doing? When in reality, we could be in that situation. That could be us. And when insider trading happens, it's an intellectual crime. It's often people not feeling that it's wrong, and it end up being wrong. It really is just being aware, and he really emphasized the idea that of being conscientious of it, and also just not letting your weaknesses get out, like knowing when you need to let someone else take the reins and do something. He used the example of going over the speed limit. So a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing something bad until we mentally are conscientious of what we are doing. So we really have to focus and realize, okay, we're going 35 and a 25, so we need to slow down. So that, he said, we all do bad things, but a lot of times, sometimes we don't even realize it. And the speed limit was that example. Then he talked about one of the prisoners that he talked to, which was Madoff, and he was a little different than everybody else because he actually knew his victims. So this was, his victims were all family and friends. So he was kind of wondering how do you see them from day to day and not feel sorry? And he, after further interviews and everything like that, he just realized that he was a less empathetic person. And that's why he thinks that he continued to do this white collar crime for so long. He didn't feel what most people could feel. And his example for this was Madoff's son died from cancer, and he had asked him to read the obituary, his son's obituary, to him. And just about as soon as he had been done reading the obituary, he completely switched, and it was completely different, completely off topic. These crimes can be very detrimental to businesses and families as well. And so he really talked about how to avoid all of this. So he talked about how we don't have a lot of humility for what we do. So making sure that we take a step back and realize our weaknesses, and when we need to ask for help, when we need to reach out to other people. And he gave an example of a company, a person who had reached out for help from someone who wasn't in the realm of what she did, but needed an outside opinion. All these other places were doing the same thing, and she just wanted the outside opinion. She got the outside opinion, and 2 years later, the other people were in prison, and she was safe because she had decided not to do it because of the outside person had said, this sounds illegal, this doesn't sound right, and she took that advice. He also talked about the organizational design. So that company, making sure that organizational design, they knew their weaknesses, and so they knew that they needed to take that step back and allow an outside opinion to come in and to make that decision for them. And that goes along with knowing your weaknesses and having an outside counsel to consult with. And then a lot of times the pressure can get to be a lot and stuff like that. So a lot of times when you're under pressure, you make decisions that you wouldn't, and that can also lead to crime.